So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, Scleroderma Atlantic webinar series. Very happy to see you all here virtually on this Sunday afternoon, and very excited to have Eric Ross here with us this afternoon as well. So Eric is with Attune, Counseling, Therapy, and Music Psychotherapy. And Eric's a registered counseling therapist and certified music therapist. He received his Master's of Education and Counseling degree from Acadia University. He has over 15 years of experience providing mental health services and support across a variety of settings. And he works in private practice in downtown Dartmouth. Of course, the winter's coming up and there's a lot going on, and Christmas season, holiday season's coming up. And of course, people feel stress all year round, but certainly as we're going into this time of year, I think it certainly elevates amongst most of us. So I think it's a very good opportunity and very good timing to have Eric join us here this afternoon. We will have an opportunity for questions after Eric has delivered his presentation, and you can, so if we can save our questions until the end, more than happy to take those questions for you. And you'll be able to do that using the chat function through Zoom, or the sort of the raise hand option that you'll see at the bottom of your screens through Zoom as well. So without further ado, again, I want to thank Eric for joining us here this afternoon. We greatly appreciate your expertise, and I'll throw it over to you to get started.
Thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen, but I just wanted to welcome everyone to our session, and it's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. It's a lovely sunny day here in Nova Scotia, which helps with stress, seeing the sunlight. So I'm going to assume everyone can see the screen. Stephanie, you can see the full-size screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so today we're talking about stress and reducing the effects of stress. Stress is one of those, process here. Stress is actually a really normal part of our functioning as humans. It's actually a normal physical and psychological response to events that are happening in our lives. The situation with stress, though, is as the demands increase and the density and intensity of those demands increase, our bodies can actually interpret that as a need to go into what is sometimes referred to as the fight, flight, or freeze response. So whether we're actually just imagining and worrying about things, our body can go into this sort of stressed state as it prepares to either fight a particular situation, to run away from a particular situation, or to freeze. So again, the response can happen whether it's a real threat or whether it's a perceived threat brought on by either our imagination or certain types of thoughts. Today, it's really about managing stress, and I'm hoping to give you a range of tools that you can take with you. The interesting thing is about managing stress, the techniques are going to be really individual. So what works for me may not work for one person, and it might not work for the other person. So you have to kind of go and find what is going to be best for you, what gives you the best response in terms of reducing the effects of stress. Again, stress is an unavoidable consequence of life, and perhaps more and more as technology and life speeds up, we're experiencing increasing amounts of stress. Some stressors are going to occur regardless of our actions. So just by changing our environment, for instance, winter's coming on, extreme cold temperatures and extreme weather actually creates a physical stress on our body. And so, yes, we can dress up warmly, but we're still going to be experiencing some of those effects. So some of those are outside of our control. Other stressors we can be prevented, and we'll spend some time today talking about that. Sometimes it's around managing our time in a different way, how we make decisions. And I'll be talking today about this idea of the 4 A's, 4 words that can help us to really limit the amount of stress that we might have in our lives. Because the effect of prolonged stress on our lives can actually create critical health effects and reduce our ability to cope with what's going on in our life. But the interesting thing is that some stress is actually good. And some folks did some research, Yerkes Dodson, and if you can see here, a certain amount of stress actually helps us. If we don't have any stress, then we become inactive and bored, and we have this experience of feeling kind of lame. In the healthy realm, stress can actually help us be motivated and be focused. And so an example of that might be the stress or nervousness we might experience before an exam. A little bit of nervousness, a little bit of stress can actually push us to do a little bit better. But for each of us, there's a breaking point or a sort of a watershed moment where it goes from being able to operate at our peak based on how much stress we have in our life. It gets into then effects that are negative for us. And that is then where we get to feel fatigued or exhausted. We can develop physical or mental sickness. And then if the intensity continues, disease process can actually begin. And so with scleroderma, it's critical that we're aware of ways that we can reduce the effects of stress on us. I've categorized them sort of in two areas here. One, effects of stress that are scleroderma specific. The most problematic might be Raynaud's syndrome, that too much stress in our life. And again, I talk about each of us can bear up under a certain amount of stress, and it's very individual. But for each of us, there's a point where it crosses over into being a negative experience. And that's when things like being triggered with the Raynaud's syndrome can actually intensify the painful scleroderma symptoms. And can actually create an immune response. So we really want to look at ways that we can lower the effects of stress. Some of the others, of course, with scleroderma, increased risk of heart disease and stroke, definitely higher blood pressure, and a lot of issues around gastrointestinal and digestive issues. We even have language that says, oh, I got butterflies in my stomach, or my guts are in knots. And that's actually a physical response to what's going on in our life. It doesn't just feel that way, but our internal organs are actually, being affected by the stress and not operating at their peak capacity. Big issue, as well as trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep. Several of the methods that I talk about today can be particularly helpful in helping us to prepare to get to sleep. And then if we do happen to wake up in the middle of the night, ways of helping ourselves to get back to sleep. And then more generally, tension and irritability, increased risk of anxiety and potentially leading to depression, can also begin to jam up our brains and too much stress, that we lose our ability to make difficult decisions, lose our appetite, anger may begin to show up. Some people describe it that they're snappier or their fuse is shorter when they're under extreme stress. And as well, muscle tension and pain, and then lack of motivation, that we just have so much stress bearing down on us that we lose our ability to keep our regular motivation going. I just included this here as part of the presentation. You'll have access to this PowerPoint, and there will be some links that you can link to. This is particularly interesting. I find that they've actually come up with values for different types of stressors that could occur in our life. And what they've done is rated them, I guess through their research. Death of a spouse is 100 points, or mean value of 100. Divorce, 75. Then on down the line. These researchers say that any value above a total of 300, and we are at a significant risk for changes in our mental or physical health. And so I'm going to include a link in a different version of this that you can actually go and complete the inventory and see for yourselves, where am I on that scale? I'm hoping that everyone might be down in the under 100, which is on that scale would indicate that a manageable level of stress where we're less likely to have mental or physical health issues. Interesting to see what some of them on. Taking on a mortgage, has a value of 31. That's quite a bit. So what can we do about stress? I liken stress almost to be like a bucket, and we have one bucket that fills up with stress. As that bucket gets higher and higher filled with stress, we begin to feel more physical and mental health effects. The challenge is that we might not be able to lower the level of the bucket depending on what we're facing in our lives. So the other bucket that we need then is a relaxation or a calming bucket. And we want the activities that we engage in to help fill that bucket up. when I'm in counseling with people, they describe the most distress when their stress bucket is filled to the brim, almost so that one more event would just cause it to tip over. And their activities to mitigate or lower the effects of stress are low. That's when they experience the most distress. One of the ways we're going to look at shortly is the 4 A's, which is a way of reducing some of the stress bucket level. And then we're also going to look at healthy ways to relieve or reduce its effect by filling up that relaxation bucket. So this idea of 4 A's is really about, I guess, taking control of our situation. We all have events and situations that are arising for us daily. We want to feel that we're in a position of having some control over those. And so the way we can do that, these are just in general, take control of our surroundings. So that might be, if we're in an unhealthy living situation or an unhealthy relationship, it might be about us actually looking, do we want to remain in that situation? Another way is if there are people who are particularly problematic based on the behavior that we're engaging in, that we can actually, limit our time with those people. Learning to say no, we'll talk more about that towards the end of my presentation. And then this idea of ditching part of our lists, right? Most of us have, a list of things that we want to accomplish, tasks that we need to attend to. Can we actually shorten that list? Are all those items on that list critical? Really giving a hard look at, okay, well, this is what I can get done in this time period, and I'm going to drop those off the list, maybe put it on the list for later in the week or something. The second A is alter. And so that's about really standing up for ourselves. If somebody is doing something that's particularly challenging, that their behavior is challenging, that we can actually ask them to change their behavior. A lot of people end up using what I call an I statement, so that we're actually identifying, I feel such and such an emotion when such and such event happens. So we actually give people really good feedback in a respectful way that we'd like to see a change in something that they're doing. We want to be able to talk about our feelings openly when we're stuffing or swallowing our emotions. That actually creates great amounts of stress because we move back into a position of feeling that we're not in control of our surroundings. Another way to alter our relationship with stress is to manage our time better. And that's about setting priorities, really being critical on what tasks are essential for me to accomplish and what can I save to a later day. And then challenging ourselves to stay focused. We'll talk about a particular way that we can do that. And being aware of what are our limits, acknowledging that we have limits and being able to help people understand those limits. A lot of times in the workforce, supervisor or boss comes in and keeps dumping more and more work on us. We have the ability and the right to say that we're reaching our limit. And it's about doing that in a respectful way. The third A is accept. And so that's about accepting our situation. Maybe it's about accepting something that someone has done to us or and moving to a position of forgiveness. If somebody has harmed or wronged us, moving to a sense of forgiveness to be able to move through that slightly. Practicing positive self-talk with ourselves. So a lot of times people talk about, focusing on their negative attributes or their negative aspects of themselves. And can we kind of flip that upside down and begin to acknowledge that we do have strengths? Allowing ourselves to learn from mistakes. So rather than seeing a mistake as a be all and end all that, we failed in some way, can we look at it? One person described it as, look at it, the cloud with the silver lining. We've made a mistake. How do we move forward from that? Treating ourselves a little bit more gently rather than beating ourselves up. And the fourth A is to adapt. This one really speaks to me, adjust our standards, right? And so that's, again, this idea that we can be really critical of ourselves. We almost beat ourselves up because we're not meeting our own standards. And can we reevaluate that? Can we still be the person whom we want to be? Can we still perform the way we want to, but slightly lower our standards or adjust them slightly? Practice thought stopping. We're going to talk about that technique, but that's about being aware of the content of our thoughts. And if they're particularly problematic or worrying thoughts, practicing a technique that we could interrupt those thoughts and replace them with something else. Reframing the issue is adapting by seeing something in a different light, seeing it from a different perspective. Again, creating an assets column. What are my strengths? What are my assets that I'm bringing to this situation? Looking at the big picture and then choosing the right technique. As I said, we'll present lots of methods and techniques today. They're very individual. What works for me may not work for you. And so you have to try some of these. I'm trying to give you as many as I can in the time that we have. Number one suggestion is to reduce our caffeine intake. It's amazing where caffeine is found today. I mean, obviously, we know it's going to be in coffee and tea, but even the chocolate that we might be eating or the energy drinks, a lot of soft drinks have caffeine that we might not be aware of. And even some medications have small amounts to counteract some of the chemicals or medication that might be create drowsiness. They sometimes put caffeine in there. And so I kind of call that hidden caffeine. We're not really aware that it's there, but it is taking an effect on our body, especially in terms of getting to sleep or staying asleep during the sleep cycle. High doses of caffeine can actually lead to anxiety response. I was quite shocked to find out the level of caffeine in some of these energy drinks. A few of my friends drink them and they're always talking about feeling on edge. And we looked at the can and the number of units of caffeine was quite shocking. Everyone is going to have a different threshold, just like any chemical or medication. The threshold for one person could be vastly different than another. So one cup of coffee might put somebody into a real sort of anxious state, whereas somebody else might be able to drink half a pot of coffee. So being aware of our own limit in terms of caffeine intake. Again, moderation, this idea that a certain amount of caffeine can actually be helpful, but if we cross that line, that individual line, can actually move into creating anxiety response. Getting enough sleep. So this is really critical. A lot of us are aware that when the body is in its sleep cycle, that it's doing a lot of rebuilding at the cellular level, right? It's recharging the muscles. It's getting us ready to have another physical day the next day. At the same time, though, it's providing us time to work through issues. Even though we're asleep, our brain is continuing to process information. And it's a time when we reset that bucket of stress that by getting a good night's sleep actually has an effect of raising that relaxation bucket slightly. And so we want to get enough sleep by having a good sleep environment. I refer to it as sleep hygiene. And so it's things about limiting alcohol and caffeine before we go to bed, setting up some type of a ritual. It's almost like we want to help our bodies and our minds to know, oh, it's getting ready. It's time to get ready to go to bed. And so sometimes setting up a bit of a ritual or a routine can be really helpful for folks. Maybe it's taking a warm bath or a shower. When we're in our room, really restricting that room to either sleep or physical intimacy if we're in a relationship. So, sometimes people say, oh, I pay my bills while I'm in bed because I can just prop the laptop up on my lap and I pay my bills for the next day. But what we're doing there is we're bringing that stressor right into that room where we really want to be able to relax and rejuvenate ourselves. So not only avoiding screen time and electronics time before bedtime, maybe up to half an hour or 45 minutes, just turning off the devices or putting them aside, but limiting that bedroom to sleep cycle, right? So that we're not doing things like, paying bills or making high stress phone calls, that type of stuff. Setting a consistent sleep time. So trying to get to bed, typically the best is about 15 minutes. A half hour would work okay, but trying to get to sleep, going into the bedroom or wherever you're sleeping within 15 or 30 minutes, keeping it really consistent. And on the other end, being really consistent in the waking up cycle so that within 15 or 30 minutes, we're consistently getting up. The body actually will adapt to that cycle. If we find that we're, grossly off, like we're staying up till 1 o'clock, but we really want to be getting to sleep at 11:30, we can back that up, but it's suggested that we do it maybe 10 or 15 minutes over a period of time. So go to sleep at 12:45, maybe for 3 or 4 days, and then go to sleep at 12:30 for 3 or 4 days. So not trying to do the adjustment in one fell swoop, but doing it in a gradual process. Schedule a worry time. So that's where we actually give ourselves time to worry about all those things that we need to worry about. But we're really intentional in limiting how much of that we do. So what I sometimes suggest to folks in counseling is that after they finish their dinner, or when they're sort of in their evening process, that they allow themselves 20 or 30 minutes of time to think about all those things that are particularly problematic or worrying in their life. At the end of that time, though, that they're doing the thought interruption technique of ending those thoughts and then focusing on something else. This idea that we can actually distract ourselves from the worrying thoughts and intentionally focus on something else. Some people do it right before they go to sleep. I find that sometimes that cycle starts and it can be challenging to end it. But we'll talk about a technique that can be really good at slowing our minds down. Exercise, the one word most of us don't want to hear. We're not talking about, having to go to the gym, 3 or 5 days a week, but it's really just about getting out and being physically active for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. It has great benefits in terms of releasing natural mood enhancers and natural painkillers. The best effects come from some type of routine. So consistently exercising maybe 3 days a week or something. And again, starting slowly, right? We don't have to suddenly go 5 days. Maybe we go for a walk 1 day a week for a month, and then we add another day. Interestingly, it's the large muscle groups with repetitive movements that create the most bang for the buck, so to speak. So walking is a great one, bicycling is a great one, anything that uses the large muscle groups, which tends to be in our lower extremities, in our legs. And really find something that you enjoy doing, right? For most of us, engaging in activity because we have to engage in it doesn't really give us enough motivation. So can we find something that we really enjoy doing? Dancing, rock climbing, yoga, walking the dog, whatever it might be, something that you enjoy doing. Practicing mindfulness awareness. So we hear these are almost buzzwords nowadays, but our senses are helping us to be in the here and now. So our nervous system works incredibly quickly. As soon as we go into a situation, our nervous system is helping us to determine, is this a safe situation or do I need to be concerned here? The way our nervous system gets its information is through all of our senses. Because it's such an immediate response, we can actually use them to keep ourselves in the moment, so to speak, in the now, as Gabor Mate calls about it. What we do is we're just focusing on one or several of our senses at a time. Some of you may have heard of this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, where it's like, what are 5 things that I can see? What are 4 things that I can hear? What are 2 things that I can smell? I just make it really simple and just say, in a quiet moment, allow yourself to be, what can you see in front of you? What can you hear around us? Is there anything that you can smell? What is your sense of touch telling you? Can you taste anything? And do you notice any movement? So just touching into those, because it's a direct feedback loop to our nervous system, it brings us into the moment. And if we're in the moment, then we're less likely to be having that hamster wheel of thoughts, creating anxiety response or stress response. Deep breathing, very powerful technique. There's a connection between our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. Don't want to get too technical here, but there are different components of our nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system is what comes online when there's a need to engage in that fight, flight, or freeze response. So if I go into a situation and my senses are telling me something is really not cool here, something feels really dangerous, our sympathetic nervous system is going to pump our body full of all sorts of different chemicals to prepare us to be ready to do fight, flight, or freeze. Our heart rate is going to go up, our breathing is going to increase, we're going to breathe much more shallow, not full breaths. We can activate the antidote to that, which is our parasympathetic nervous system. That's what helps us to calm down after our sympathetic nervous system has told us to be in high gear. The best way to invoke or to create a relaxation response is to focus on our breathing. There's lots of different types of breathing. I'm going to talk about two. One is this 4-square breathing or box breathing. That technique, as you see in the box there, is I typically start in the bottom left-hand corner. And as we're counting to 4, we breathe in. As we're holding our breath along the top of the box, we breathe out. So we're scanning our eyes around the box. As we're going down the box, we breathe out to the count of 4. And again, as we trace along the bottom, we're holding our breath to the count of 4. So anytime we're moving up, we're breathing into the count of 4. When we're moving down and tracing the box, we're breathing out. And when we're going horizontal, we're holding our breath. The benefit is that by breathing more deeply, that sends a signal to the parasympathetic nervous system that it's okay, you can relax. There's nothing of threat here. So the goal is to focus on your breath, to slow it down and to make it deeper. Another technique I like is extending the out breath. So if we're breathing into a certain count, we want to double the count going out. So what I sometimes suggest to people is that they breathe into the count of 2, and then they would breathe out to the count of 4. Extending the out breath sends a strong, almost like backward signal to the nervous system saying, look, I'm breathing really slowly and really deeply. Everything's calm here. And that allows the parasympathetic nervous system then to bring, sort of get those chemicals out of our body so that our heart rate comes down, our breathing comes down. We move out of that fight, flight, or freeze response. Again, in the version that I give to Scleroderma Atlantic, I'll be including a link to a video that you can practice that 4-square breathing technique. It's also a very powerful technique, as I mentioned, if we're lying in bed and the hamster wheel of thoughts is spinning. Purposefully doing this technique several times, repeating it 2 or 3 times, can really help to interrupt the hamster wheel. And then the step would be to challenge ourselves to think about something else. So this 4-square breathing interrupts the thoughts long enough that we then challenge those thoughts or replace those thoughts with another type of thinking. Maybe thinking about a trip that we're looking forward to, or a place that we visited that brought us a great amount of pleasure. If the beach is your favorite place, allowing yourself to think about a beach that you really enjoy going to. Replacing the problematic thinking with more positive thinking. Progressive muscle relaxation. Again, I'm going to be including a link to a video and the instructions for this. But basically what we're doing is we're progressively moving up. I typically tell people to start with their feet, clenching the muscles in our feet and then letting them relax. Doing that a couple of times. So we're purposefully focusing on the tension created by tightening the muscles and then focusing on that sense of relaxation. We then progress upward. So we would include the right and left lower leg and the feet, tightening all those muscles, holding for a short amount of time, and then letting everything relax. We do each cycle twice, and then we add another muscle group. So then we would add the large muscles at the tops of our legs. So tightening those, tightening our calf muscles, and tightening our feet muscles. Holding for just a second, feeling that tension, and then letting everything relax, being aware of the sense of relaxation. So progressive in the sense that we progress from the bottoms of our feet all the way up to the top of our head. As I said, I'll send you some instructions on how to do that. Listening to soothing music. I'm not sure how soothing the music is that our little man or person there is listening to, but music for many people is a wonderfully non-threatening way to be in time. There's an interesting principle called the ISO principle, that the beat, the tempo, the speed of the music that we're listening to, our heart will actually begin to try and align with that. Music has such a powerful effect on our physiology, on our bodies, that this ISO principle has been proven to show that the speed of the music, the tempo of the music we're listening to, will begin to affect our heart rate. And so we want to be intentional in picking some slow-paced instrumental music. The reason why we suggest instrumental is the lyrics might come in and that might actually be counteractive to creating a sense of less stress. The lyrics themselves might be creating some sense of worry. So typically slower-paced instrumental music can bring on a sense of relaxation. And again, because we're relaxing, our blood pressure is coming down, our heart rate is lowering, and the stress hormones, the cortisol, is being taken out of the system. Pick a type of music that you enjoy. There's no right or wrong here. Some people like to listen to nature sounds by themselves, or they will pair the nature sounds with some music. And I will be sending some links to some songs that I typically use in my counseling work with people that you might find helpful. Spending time with family and friends, really critical. Being social can be a wonderful way of helping us to feel less stressed and to mitigate, to lower the effects of stress. Being able to talk with people about things that are going on in our situation. Found that one study talks about actually raising oxytocin levels by spending time with family and friends. I guess the caveat there is if we have particularly challenges in our relationship with some of our family, that might not be the parts of our family that we spend time with. It's the sense of belonging which can help us to feel, back to the very beginning of our conversation today, the sense of control and connectedness. Spending time with your pet, a lot of research around this, spending time with our pets decreases stress. Part of the effect comes from focusing on another being, right? So that if I'm consumed, if I'm really caught up in the thoughts of all the stressful events that are going on in my life, by spending some time with a pet, we're actually having to focus on them for a short time. Again, so we're interrupting those thoughts about our situation and focusing on what they might need. It's also been shown that oxytocin is released when we're spending time with our pets. Generally, it gives us a purpose, keeps us active. If we have a dog, we're probably out walking them once or twice a day. And that sense of companionship that we talked about in spending time with our families. Counseling, talking with a professional, can be very helpful. Life coaching, a lot of people are using, which is slightly different than counseling, but having that place that we can go and talk with somebody. And a neutral third party is the way I describe it. A lot of people come into sessions and they say, it's just been really great being able to get this off of my chest, to get it out in the open. They may bring in experiences of trying to talk with family or friends about certain things, and sometimes they don't get the support that they're looking for. And so counseling therapists or psychologists, social workers are bringing that non-judgmental, accepting approach. Take a yoga class. Interesting that research is showing that stretching is actually very beneficial for reducing the effects of stress. Stretching, just like in the progressive muscle relaxation technique, purposefully stretching the muscle and then letting it relax, again, has the effect of lowering stress response. Also shown to lower cortisol levels. Cortisol is the chemical that's released when we're in high stress situations, and it's been proven to have very negative effects on the body. Aromatherapy. My grandmother used to say that spraying lavender on the pillow before she went to sleep was wonderful for her. A lot of people find different scents to be very helpful in terms of them setting up a less stressful situation. Again, it's using our sense of smell, sense of vision. We can, look at the candle, we can smell the scent, helps us to be in the moment. Might be that the stressors are creating a lot of worry thoughts, pulling us into the future or worrying about the past. By paying attention to the scent and the light from the candle can help us to be in the moment and interrupt the worry cycle. Chewing gum. This was a new one to me. I was telling Stephanie at the beginning when we were just setting up the technology, I never knew that chewing gum is actually being shown to be a stress reduction technique. The research is kind of linking it with the fact that the muscles of the chewing mechanism are actually helping the brain to get more blood flow, and that likely has an effect on lowering our stress. Interesting, another study talked about strong chewing. So that's interesting, that I guess very robust chewing has more effect than light chewing. I'm gonna have to do some more reading about that. Laughter. There's actually a form of counseling getting more and more research done on it. Laughing groups, where a group of people get together and they will either watch something to start laughing or telling jokes, whatever it is to invoke the laughing. Laughing has a huge effect on relieving our stress response. It also lessens muscle tension by using those muscles. Also invokes our breathing apparatus. So again, we're typically taking larger, deeper breaths when we're laughing. It also, if we're laughing, we're not likely able to feel as stressed. Research being done that these long-term laughing groups, as they're called, improves immune system response and mood. Interesting that another study showed that individuals experienced more of a stress relief with laughter than with simple distractions. So earlier I talked about thought replacement or thought distracting thoughts. If we've been having worrying thoughts and we interrupt those by doing the box breathing technique, rather, the distraction technique would be to think about a beach that we like to go to or a trip that we want to take, something like that. Showing that laughter is actually more powerful as a stress reliever than distraction techniques. Physical intimacy, cuddling, holding hands, all those things, again, lowers cortisol levels, releases other chemicals, the feel-good chemicals, brain chemistry chemicals that help us to feel nurtured and cared for, having a direct result on our stress level, bringing it down. Practice saying no, probably the best technique of limiting how much we're taking on. And I say practicing because for many of us, it's a challenge to say no. The boss keeps bringing us more work and we say, sure, I'll get to it. We actually have to practice standing up for ourselves and in a respectful way, say, no, I can't take that on at this time, or no, I can't do it now, but I could do it later, or something like that. When we're taking on more than we can handle, then that's a time to start practicing saying no. And also being selective about what we can take on, right? Which of those tasks or functions can we take on that are most pleasing to us? And also the ones that we bring the most skill to. Definitely increased stress occurs when we're involved with an activity that we may not be familiar with. So saying no to those activities that we don't enjoy or we're not comfortable doing, and accepting the ones that we might be. Time management, as we near the end, these are sort of broader ideas that, the world is getting busier and busier. Technology seems to be making things faster and faster. People expect that immediately response to a text message. They want an email response, within a certain amount of time. Again, this idea of saying no to unnecessary tasks, prioritizing for ourselves. What are the things most important to me at this point in time? Mapping it out so that you can create a coordinated approach to it. Doing some more tasks online while sitting in front of a screen has its own effect on our nervous system and on our stress levels. Doing some tasks can actually lower a stressor because we don't have to go out to do it. We can stay in, banking by online banking as an example, or online meetings such as this. reduces our stress. We're not encountering traffic, not having to deal with the chaos that exists outside of our own homes. Knowing our limitations and being honest about those, right? Acknowledging that, yes, I have strengths, but I also have limitations. Reviewing our schedules once in a while to make sure that it's manageable, and then if need be, reprioritizing. I like to think that one technique I talk with folks about is making a list of no more than 5 items for a particular period of time. If we're noticing halfway through the day that we have only got 2 done, then we take 3 off the bottom of the list and add them to the top of the next day's list, so that we're not trying to drive ourselves so hard on that particular day. Plan ahead so you're not scrambling to complete tasks. For those of us, such as myself, that are not good morning people, doing as much stuff pre-set up as we can, picking our clothes the night before, setting up the coffee maker if we have coffee in the morning, if there's any food prep that we can do, making our lunch the night before, and then we just have to grab it and take it with us. The more prepared we are to go into our day with a really defined list of critical tasks, the less stress our lives will be. And finally, to avoid procrastination, which for most of us is quite a challenge, trying to, again, this idea of staying on top of what we have set as priorities. This 5-minute approach is, if we have a series of tasks to do, start just by doing 5 minutes of a particular task. Sometimes we go into a situation where we think, oh, I have to accomplish this whole thing by the end of the day. That can feel really monumental and really off-putting. And so easing into it by saying, okay, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, then I'm going to take a bit of a break, then I'll come back and do another 5 minutes. So, again, being gentle with ourselves rather than trying to do something all at once, doing it in a more measured approach. Again, a to-do list to set things by priority. Being realistic with deadlines, right? So giving ourselves some extra time on tasks rather than feeling that it has to be done immediately. And working on the critical items first, right? What are those essential tasks that we need to get done so that we're setting our day in movement? Multitasking is, largely misunderstood. We all think that we can multitask, but what actually happens is that actually creates increased stress for us. So completing one task and then moving on to the next tends to be less stressful for us than if we're doing task A and then a little bit of task B and a little bit of task C. Focusing on one task and then switching to another will provide less of a stress effect. Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone being here, and I hope that some of those methods might be good. Give them a try, as we talked about, very individual. What works for one person may not work for the best. So it's about finding a mix of stress reduction techniques that are going to work for you.
Thank you so much, Eric. There's a lot of great information in there. A couple of key takeaways that I just jotted down, that just a reminder for folks too who might be on the line. Learn to say no. That's a big one, I think, because
yeah, definitely.
Having that immediate response to, of course, with with texting nowadays and Facebook messages and all that, and like you hear the ding on your phone and you're just like, okay, I need to go do that right now. Like that's something I think a lot of us just tend to do for sure. Schedule worry time was something that I had never really thought about before, but I think it's a really good tool, a really good technique.
Yeah, that's a technique that has come out of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just a particular way of framing working with people. But it's about acknowledging that our minds are going to worry about things. Our minds are constantly churning over material, and that's where our thoughts come from. But being really intentional on limiting, especially if we're having worry thoughts, which in and of themselves then begin to increase our stress level, so much so that we might go into anxiety response. Purposefully limiting that, spending time with what we need to attend to, worrying about the details, but then sort of cutting it off and say, okay, that's it. I've done my half hour, I've done my 20 minutes, whatever it might be. Now I need to focus on something else. I'm going to go put on a piece of music, or I'm going to grab a book and read it, or I'm going to sit on the sofa and think about the beach that I love.
Yeah, that was really quite interesting. We'll open the floor to questions in a couple of secs, but I'm going to be selfish and ask a couple of my own first. But I never heard the sort of the life coaching versus therapy before. I guess life coaching is sort of a new term to me. I was wondering if you maybe just give a quick what the difference between the two.
Right. So I guess the first difference is what people are bringing into the work. So the people who are accessing that service are sometimes bringing in topics that wouldn't necessarily be well served by working with a therapist. And so sometimes it's life decisions, oftentimes around health issues. It's some people, I'm not sure I agree with the term, but they kind of call it therapy light. I don't think that's a helpful term, because what comes for the people when they go to those sessions is very, very powerful. But it's just a different approach in terms of the way we view the issues that we're working on and the material that we're actually working on with people.
Perfect. Good. Interesting. And in the last bit, of course, it impacts everyone. Of course, we're coming through COVID and, hitting waves and waves of COVID, and now going into another winter season with lots of respiratory, whether it's COVID, the influenza, whatever, lots of respiratory illnesses out there. So a lot of what you talked about, talk about exercise, you talk about having social time with friends and family, of course, with people with scleroderma, and then people who have, diseases in general, typically can't get out and do those things, especially when we're going through COVID, and people are just perhaps afraid or not want to do that. So I'm just wondering if maybe just chat a couple of seconds about sort of, in light of and sort of the situation that we're in today, sort of maybe one of the couple of the top things you might suggest for people to think about.
And the critical thing there is we have to be aware of what our comfort level is, right? If I'm not comfortable going out without masks, then I should choose to go out with a mask. If I'm not comfortable going out at all, then I need to choose that, right? We really have to be aware of what our needs are. Otherwise, we're just creating a stress response by, likely worrying about, being out in public. But I think, so Zoom, as much as we're all probably, tired of doing conversations by Zoom, it is a great way to connect with people. Back to calling people on the telephone, right? I mean, I know a lot of people, we all have these devices, but so many of us don't use them as phones. We're using them as texting and email. So reaching out in other modalities, right? Can we call our friends? Can we Zoom with them? That type of approach. Or setting up a situation where we might invite, if it's comfortable for us to be in our own space, again, that idea of how do we control our surroundings, our environment. Can I set my living space up where it feels comfortable enough for me to have one person to come in? And maybe they're sitting on the other side of the room and I'm on the other side, but that's comfortable enough for me to have direct face-to-face contact. That's what many of us have done in terms of reopening our practices for face-to-face counseling, is, the chairs are much farther apart than they would have been before COVID. A lot of people are looking for that face-to-face in person. And so we can do that with our friends. But again, what's under my control? Okay, well, I can move a chair over in that corner and then put another chair over there. We sit down with our masks on and then, take our masks off. Being aware of our needs and what our comfort zone is.
Perfect. Okay, I'll open the floor to questions. If there's anyone who has a question, feel free to use the raise hand function through Zoom. So under reactions at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the option there to raise a hand, or you can type your question into the chat function as well. If anybody has a question for Eric, certainly let us know. We'll give a couple of minutes for any questions to come in.
Oh, yeah, chat, I see. Okay, now. Had to find where the chat button was.
Perhaps while we're waiting to see if there's anything come in, I will just mention, so Eric, through his presentation, did say that he was going to be sending the presentation to us. So we will be making that available to everyone here on this call today, as well as to the entire our entire database. So that'll be shared in the days to come. And it'll also, this presentation or this recording will also be found on our YouTube channel towards the end of the week once we get that uploaded. So certainly lots of great information that you've shared today. We want to capture that. So that'll be shared out quite widely. So that's great.
Yeah, and the version that I send will have some resources that people can click on or access, because I realize, the amount of information didn't allow us to go into the techniques to actually practice them, but other than the couple that we looked at. So I'll be having some links in there that people can kind of find find out how to do the techniques a little bit more precisely.
Perfect. So we have one thank you in our chat. So no questions that I'm seeing, unless anyone else is seeing a question. But again, just want to say thank you, Eric. Like you said, there's lots of information to share there. There's going to be information that we'll be sharing out with links and such. I think it's a very relevant topic, as I said, sort of at the kickoff, definitely all year long, but I think going into this particular season, like either with the holidays or with COVID, all of that, I think it's very relevant. So I think it was very timely. So lots of great information. So certainly appreciate you taking your afternoon here with us.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and I hope people found it helpful. I often say, take what you need and leave the rest. And by us sending out some links and stuff, people can continue to explore what's going to work for them the best to help them with their stress levels and lowering the effects of the stress, right? Can't always get rid of the stressors. Can we shift our relationship with them? Perfect.
That's great. And thanks everybody for joining. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday and the rest of your weekend. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.